Okay, I think it's working.
All right. Speedy quick. Look at us go. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for being here. Great to see you guys. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our meeting today. Hopefully you guys spared some brain cells for this call this afternoon. I recognize it is 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. But we got a lot of good content to go through today. And thank you to Anna for supplying all of the great content that we're going to get to review today. So confirming folks can see my screen. Good to go. All right. Cool. So our agenda for today. Today we are going to start with welcome approval of meeting minutes. And then we've got a quick update from you or for you all on what we're working on for the public engagement plan. So we took a lot of you guys' feedback. We met with Adam and team, and we've talked about kind of how do we integrate all of these ideas into a comprehensive approach to public engagement. So we'll give you an update on what we're working on, and then at a future meeting, we hope to come back with that final prepared plan. So more to come, but we'll just kind of give you an update on where we're at. And there will be a homework ask for you all in that piece. Then we will move on to understanding the 2024 appeals process that has wrapped up and has implications for our work as a board and in the 2024 IECC. We will kind of give you a high level update of what has shifted as part of that appeals process. And then as you guys have questions, happy to answer those. There were a couple of questions that we flagged as follow-up items from our commercial discussion at the last meeting. So I'll turn it over to Anna to answer some of those questions before we spend the rest of the meeting diving into residential. And then we'll wrap up and say happy Friday and hope you guys have a great weekend. Any questions on where we're headed? Cool. All right, so our objectives for today, you guys have a sense of what we're working on for the public engagement process, and we give a chance to ask you guys for some support in identifying contacts for that process. You guys will understand the implications of the IECC appeals. In addition, it's not noted here, but we'll also cover briefly, our team had a little conversation around how we're going to approach the cost modeling pieces for this code. And so we wanted to give you guys an update on what you can expect as far as cost modeling as we move through the process, so that the sort of expectation is set outright when and where you guys will get information and what format that info will be in. We'll talk about any clarifications, questions from the last meeting, and then we will dive right into the residential 2024 code. Alrighty, so starting out with the approval of meeting minutes. Hopefully you all had a chance to look through the meeting number 2 minutes. Can I get a motion from anyone on the board for an approval of the meeting minutes, or is there any changes, suggested edits that need to be made?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Ron. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, great, 2 seconds. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Carolyn. All in favor, please unmute and say aye.
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 Hi.
Great. Kristen, is that a aye? Was that the hand
Yeah,
raise?
hands.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And if anybody does not agree with the approval of the minutes, please say aye. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Meeting minutes from meeting number 2 are approved, and we will get those up on the CEO website for all of you folks listening in. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Allie, to give us an update on the public engagement plan.
Thanks, Kim. As Kim alluded to in her little agenda debrief, Lotus has been pretty busy. We really enjoyed the last conversation we had with you all on public engagement, and are really excited that you're we were able to sort of reach consensus around the board's interest in expanding public outreach. And so we've taken your comments and we're pulling those into sort of what we call a meeting syllabus for these public engagement sessions. We heard from you all that you want to hear a little bit and work a little bit more directly with certain stakeholders. And so we felt like that fell into, if you're familiar with the IAP2 spectrum of public participation that involve side of the spectrum, which means working to ensure that these stakeholders' concerns and aspirations are reflected in the code that you'd all develop. And so we're really interested here in expanding outreach into equity priority communities, as well as certain subject matter experts. And so part of that process is also developing engagement goals and metrics, which we will be excited to present to you all at a future meeting. Do folks have questions on what we're working on so far? If not, we can move into homework. Oh, yes, forgot about this one. So one of the concerns we heard from stakeholders was that certain board meeting times were not very accessible to members of the public who might want to engage with the board. And so one of the meetings further down in our schedule is slated to be the second public engagement meeting, October 17th. Currently it's at 9 a.m. and we're wondering if the board is okay with moving this time to 2 to 4. So it's a little bit later in the day, and hopefully folks are a little bit more available and not able to flex some of that those work hours. Kim, did you want to facilitate a vote or a discussion on that?
Yeah, I guess I think this was Kristen who brought this up last time. The first public engagement meeting is also from 9 to 11. So the other idea here is like, let's make sure we have options that are at different times on these different days so that folks, if they have standing or recurring conflicts, they can make it. So I think I would love everyone to take the step of opening your calendars if you have it at your computer, taking a look at that October 17th date, and letting, maybe it's just a hand raise if you have a major conflict and are concerned about switching the time of that meeting, to please raise your hand and we can kind of talk through those pieces. Elizabeth.
Yeah, not really so much for me personally, but 2 to 4 does cross over the kid pickup window. So I'm not sure that is actually helpful. Could it be later in the day so that it sort of crosses into like end of the workday? I'm not sure why 2 to 4 is better than 9 to 11, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary motivation was to not have both our first and second public engagement meeting from 9 to 11, because the first one is May 30th, I think, from 9 to 11 on a Thursday. So this would just provide a second like time slot option. Elizabeth, are you suggesting 3 to 5 as that end of workday slot?
Yeah, I was thinking like, if people are trying to leave work early, like this is still in the middle of the day from a workday perspective, and perhaps worse because now it's, end of school times as well.
Okay, no, that's a very helpful perspective.
But it works for me personally.
I don't think we have a qualm one way or the other if it goes 3 to 5 or 2 to 4. I think the intent was just to switch up, have one morning session and one afternoon session between our 2 sessions. So I guess let me check the chat real quick because
It's like we're hearing some later in the evening preferences, as late as 7. Good question.
Oh yeah, sorry, Allie, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go for it.
No, Kayla was asking if there's any evening public engagement meetings.
Not currently. The webinar is from 4 to 5:30. Is that right? So somewhat evening, but not really. Okay. Seeing some of the comments, maybe what we can do is send out a really quick poll following this meeting so we can get a sense from you guys on what would be best. I agree that it might be nice to have an after work meeting. I also want to be cognizant that that is going to be a meeting where the board is all expected and to join, versus the webinar where our team will really be leading that conversation and the board is welcome to attend, but it's maybe not mandatory. I wouldn't call this mandatory, but we would really like you guys to be at this meeting. This is going to be the first session where we've got a draft code package and we're asking for the public to respond to it. So in that vein, I want to be respectful of everybody's evenings. I don't know that, you know, we're happy to flex whatever the board wants to do, but I just want to be thoughtful of everybody's time in an already very time intensive process. So we'll follow up with a quick survey. Maybe the options will just kind of span the times from 2 to 7, and we'll ask folks to fill it out on what works best. And then we can present those results. And if there is a majority, we can move forward with that. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Scheduling is tough, and I appreciate you guys being flexible with it to make sure we can be accommodating with these meetings. Back to you, Allie.
Great. Cool. So as we mentioned, there will be homework after this meeting. We're really hoping that we can leverage all of your networks in filling out what we call a stakeholder engagement contact list. And so we're, again, trying to reach these equity priority communities and subject matter experts. And we need your help in adding your own network contacts into and making sure that we're reaching a wide variety and a diversity of stakeholders as we recruit for these meetings. We will be sending out a file where you can add all of your contacts, and we're hoping you can do so by Friday, April 19th. And if you would be able to, just add a quick note about whether your contacts are equity priority communities or subject matter experts. Is that clear? Do folks have questions on that assignment? Yeah, Kristen.
Are we supposed to be prioritizing subject matter experts and contacts in the area that we were appointed to the board for, or another area?
I would say whoever you feel it can lend relevant insights or expertise. Good question.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I might need a little more guidance on this as well. I mean, like, is it everybody I know? What and do you all have maybe like specific demographics you want to fill? This feels really open-ended. Like, do I put all 6,000 of my Google contacts in there? Like, what are we really looking for here?
Yeah, Kim, I saw you on mute. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So this is in response to our conversation we had at the last board meeting that you guys have your own unique communities and networks that you interact with on a regular basis that may want to lend some input into this process. That could be, you know, if you're more a rural community, that could just be making sure you get like folks in a diverse geographical region engaged. If Elizabeth, if you've had folks that have worked with the state codes and have been like, I really want to give input, and like that's the type of contact to identify. If you want to blast it out to your whole email list, we can blast it out to your whole email list. So it's a little bit of like, please use your best judgment. And this is going to be the listserv we use primarily to send out the notifications of the public engagement meetings, right? So if there's someone in your contact list, a CBO you work with, a local government agency you work with, specific contractors or other companies you work with that you think will want to have some input here, that's the type of stakeholder we're looking for. Yeah, I guess I would just, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a little reluctant to put my contacts onto an email list, but could you create a link that I can forward to people and say, hey, if you want to be a part of this, sign up here?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Could we do it that way instead of us signing people up for emails? That I feel a little uncomfortable about that. I want to make people mad that I'm signing them up for emails that they didn't expect. Does that make sense? Could we do that just a different way?
I think we could do both. I guess I would offer up both. If members of this board have contacts that they have spoken with about engaging on this process that they would like involved, we will send out the contact list and please add those folks to the list. And then on CEO's website, there is a sign up for being on the listserv. So we can
so people could subscribe or something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll send out both of those, and I appreciate that concern, Elizabeth. Thanks for thinking through that. Kim.
One of my questions Elizabeth helped to answer. The other is, will the emails come out in a format that's just easy for us to forward to our contacts? I know for myself that it depends on who I get an email from as to how well I prioritize it. And sometimes coming from somebody local versus something that looks more broad, statewide, can be overlooked, I would think.
Absolutely. That's a great point. These emails would be sent, I believe, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, through CEO's listserv. So they would be the format that, like in a sort of more official CEO notice. So yeah, Kim, I think that would be, if you feel comfortable forwarding that format, happy to have that be the pathway that folks get engaged here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? These are good questions. Not hearing any. Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys sticking with us as we figure out the public engagement pieces, and we will follow up. But Allie, back to you.
Well, that's the last of our public engagement updates.
All right. Awesome. So yeah, we will send that stakeholder list out. If you all feel comfortable filling that in with some stakeholders you know might be involved, cohorts you're working with, anything like that, feel free to add those stakeholders. Otherwise, we will also send the link with the Google form for folks to sign up for their own updates. So whatever way you choose, I think the primary ask is that we just want your guys' help and need your guys' help in reaching the different networks that you all interact with on a regular basis. And so in whichever way you choose to help us share the word about the public engagement, we appreciate your support in that aspect. Adam.
One thing I would just add too is I think there's also an emphasis and a priority here to start reaching communities that are significantly impacted by advanced energy codes, but don't necessarily have like a technical expertise or technical knowledge of them. So just keep that in mind too, as if there are organizations or community members or community-based organizations that you work with or that you are aware of that is significantly impacted by these regulations that will be coming out. I would highly encourage you to consider either, doing, Elizabeth, your strategy about encouraging them to sign up if they're interested or forwarding them emails or whatever structure that looks like. But I think that's an area also where, it's very difficult to engage because they may not be super tuned in to the process that we're working on, but that doesn't mean they're not significantly impacted by it. So just keeping that in mind.
Thanks, Adam. All right, so more to come on that. Once we build out our full plan, we'll be excited to present that to you guys at an upcoming meeting. So now I'm going to pass it right back to you, Adam, to talk about the decisions on the 2024 IECC appeal.
Sure, thanks. So as many of you probably have seen by now or heard me talk about, I know I've been on a number of meetings with several of you talking about the IECC appeals process and what was the ultimate outcome that the ICC board, the decisions they made in order to move forward with the finalization of the 2024 IECC. Unfortunately, it was literally, I think it came out the day after we had our meeting about what was all in the commercial provisions of the code, and now several of those things have changed. So just providing some updates here, but just a little bit of an overview of the process for those of you who don't quite as closely follow the ICC code development process. The 2024 IECC was developed through a different process than it has been historically, and there was more of a consensus-based process rather than significantly influenced by local governments and states as it has historically been. And so the board had consensus committees that were responsible for essentially determining what was going to be in each of the residential and the commercial portions of the code. And those consensus committees, spent I guess, 2+ years, working together to, through several iterations of public comments and, consensus-based processes to try to figure out, compromises on what can be done moving forward to, strengthen the code in ways that are, viewed widely as effective, but also trying to minimize the cost impact and other considerations as well. And so these consensus committees spent countless hours working on that over the last couple of years, and ultimately came to final code packages in, I think it was November of last year, where there was the final vote of the consensus committees and of the membership of ICC, and had significant consensus moving forward with both of the commercial chapter or commercial provisions and the residential provisions as they had been developed by the consensus committees. And then the IACC has an appeals process where anyone who feels that it is not, there are provisions that are not appropriate for what, for a number of different reasons, whether it was there were procedural abnormalities or whether provisions don't align with the scope and intent. There are a lot of different grounds on which organizations and companies can appeal provisions that the consensus committees included. And essentially, those appeals targeted a number of specific provisions, largely those that seek to focus more on building decarbonization, and some that are not necessarily exclusively focused on energy efficiency. And so as you look at this list of different provisions that were appealed, all of these different provisions were appealed by various companies and organizations. And the ICC has kind of like had a two-phase appeals process. The first was an appeals board that was specially appointed by the ICC Board of Directors that considered all of these provisions and determined that they did not feel that any of the appeals were valid or should be upheld, and recommended to the ICC Board to reject all of the appeals and leave all of these provisions in the code as the consensus committees had developed them. And the ICC Board, took those recommendations and did their own process of, they had meetings and reviews and perspectives from ICC staff and attorneys and their own perspectives, and ultimately decided to essentially reverse the recommendations of the appeals board and uphold all or mostly all of the appeals that had been submitted, and remove all the provisions that you see on the screen here that had been in the base code of commercial and residential provisions. And all of these were now removed from the base code and put into voluntary appendices, along with the other voluntary appendices that were already in the draft version of the code. And so Anna talked about a number of these different provisions. The first one there is the provision that would have required essentially any building that is not served for space heating or cooling by an electric heat pump, that there would have to be additional efficiency requirements. I think it was 25% greater energy efficiency, additional credits from C406 would have been required for buildings that did not use heat pump as heating or cooling. So that is now going to be a voluntary appendix. There were several provisions that required capability for demand response for various systems, heating, water heating, and lighting systems. All of those have been now removed to an appendix. And then all of the EV ready and EV charging infrastructure, the energy storage ready and infrastructure requirements, solar readiness, and electric readiness, all of those provisions were also removed from the commercial base code and moved into an appendix. And so I think, Kim, you can go to the next slide. That was kind of the extent of the list of provisions that had been included in the base code that are now going to be in voluntary appendices when the final code comes out. And then there were also a couple of provisions that were in already voluntary appendices that for reasons that were explained to be related to EPCA, the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, preemption that prevents jurisdictions from adopting building codes that require, appliances to have greater efficiency, or potentially to have fuel switching requirements. There were some concerns that federal law preempts that, and there were concerns that by leaving the all-electric appendices that were in the draft as appendices, it might make it more likely that jurisdictions would adopt them. And so what the board decided to do was to remove those, both the all-electric commercial and all-electric residential appendices, from the list of appendices, and they are now what they are calling a resource, which will, as far as we know, will still accompany the code book, but will no longer be an official appendix like the rest of the appendices. And then there was also a portion of one of the appendices that was essentially a strengthening of the additional efficiency credits that are required, that they also removed because they essentially said that they did not feel that there was reasonable ability to meet those requirements. And so they removed that section of the appendix. So they didn't remove the entire appendix, but just the section that required the additional efficiency credits in the prescriptive path. And then there's a similar appendix on the residential side that they decided to keep, but add a cautionary note to essentially say the same thing as to the reasoning why they removed the commercial version, is that they felt that there were few compliance options and it was going to be difficult to achieve those additional efficiency credits. So those are the major changes that happened as a result of the appeals process. And maybe before we talk what the implications are there, did anyone have any questions on any of that? Will, go ahead. Okay, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. That was a great summary. I appreciate that for the team here, the group. I was curious if you had a copy where you could pull up the updated intent language out of the IECC that the group can read, or I'm putting you on the spot there.
I do not have it, but I could get it.
Okay, or we could come circle back. I think it might be helpful just so the group can see, because there was added language from the 21 into the 24. And I think it was part of the reason why the ICC board did some of their actions, but thanks.
Yep. Yeah, that is largely the basis for a lot of their decisions, was the updated scope and intent language. And also there was there was a memo essentially sent from ICC staff to these consensus committees that essentially addressed concerns that had been raised about those, and ICC staff essentially, with no objection, no public objection from the ICC board, said you can include building decarbonization measures in the base code. So I think that was where a lot of the confusion came from, is that, well, if they said that and the board didn't object, then why are they coming back at the end and stripping out all of these provisions? So, but Tim, I'm happy to try and find that scope and intent language and drop it in the chat or something for everybody to see.
I have the draft number 2 intent pulled up if you want to see that one.
Yeah, if you could do that, Anna, that'd be awesome.
Can you enable screen sharing? Sorry.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I have to think through it. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Maybe it's my laptop. Well, give everyone a minute to read.
And I apologize, is this the revised language or is this the original?
This is the revised language.
Okay. It's just interesting that they still have the glide path language in there.
So this is draft number 2.
Yeah, so I guess, Carolyn, they might modify this a little bit based on decisions, but this is the latest, I should say, this is the latest version of language that is out there.
Yes. And this is, I think, in my opinion.
I'll say, I think, yeah, the crux of the issue is that one sentence right there. So the sentence that starts with the code may include not, or just the sentence that reads, the code may include non-mandatory appendices incorporating additional energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction resources developed by the Code Council and others. So that was largely the sentence that was the implication behind the board's cited by the board as to why they removed some of the other provisions that may not necessarily have a direct correlation with energy efficiency, but do have a direct correlation with greenhouse gas emission reductions. So as I mentioned, when Tim was asking about it, there was a memo from ICC staff that essentially there were questions that were raised about this particular section of the scope and about whether or not any greenhouse gas reduction measures could be included in the base code. And the ICC staff essentially in their recommendations to the consensus committee said, yes, they can include building decarbonization measures in addition to energy efficiency measures. And as I noted, the board, as far as we know, the ICC board had no objections to the memo that was sent, or certainly they did not do so publicly if they had any objections. And so the consensus committees moved forward with that recommendation. And yet the board ultimately in its final decision moved forward with removing the provisions from the base code that the consensus committees had included that relate to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Kristen, did you have a question?
Just big picture. So does this mean that this is a weaker code than the last one we adopted?
It does not, because technically speaking, from an energy efficiency perspective, there's been some analysis done on this that shows that it is in fact still, energy savings, and both in the residential and commercial provisions. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. So, the items like the mandatory PV and the upgraded lighting efficiencies and HVAC efficiencies are still included. The items that were really pulled out, in my opinion, I guess, really penalized non-heat pump heating and required additional first costs like the EV charging and the energy storage readiness that were honestly the biggest first cost items in our analysis as well. And you'll see we updated our energy modeling, but the numbers in terms of annual energy cost savings and EUI only changed a very slight amount. We'll have to do an update when we get the official code language, I think, to make sure that we were correct. And nothing else was pulled out, but there was a large update to the annual energy cost, but a very, very small change to the annual energy cost savings. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm sorry. I thought that the solar part was taken out too in that list that had been presented.
The mandatory solar is still required, but the solar readiness for the additional roof space is not required.
Correct. So maybe we can go back to the slide now about implications of all of these appeals and what that means for us. So I think the good news for our purposes, not necessarily for potentially anyone else in the country who might be wanting to use this code, but at least for our purposes, the truth is that for the most part, the results of this appeals process has not really changed what we can or cannot do, because the Energy Code Board is empowered by the statute to include provisions both from the IECC base code as well as any appendices to the IECC. And so given that most of the provisions that were removed from the base code were moved into appendices, if the board reviews those different provisions and ultimately makes the determination that you feel that any of them, it is appropriate to move back into the base code, that is something that the board is empowered to do. So for the most part, that is not going to be a major impact on our process. I will also note too that many of the provisions that were removed from the base code relate to readiness, so electric, EV, and solar readiness, which we have already developed a minimum requirement for electric, EV, and solar readiness. So those provisions are already going to be mandatory requirements for the state, regardless of how they end up in ended up in the IECC. So just wanted to note that those already exist, and many of the other provisions are still ones that this board has the opportunity to evaluate and decide whether or not there's a place for those provisions in this code. Carolyn, did you have a question about that, or should I talk about the all-electric appendices first?
You can talk about the all-electric appendices, although it's related to, my question is related to that, and it's kind of a question back to David. I apologize if it's been covered. I'm clear that within our base code, we have constraints on being more stringent than either 2021 or 2024. I was less clear on our ability to add optional appendices and if there are constraints on that. And I saw your bullet on the all electric. And so I wasn't quite clear from the statute whether we're constrained on optional appendices as well.
Yeah, I was going to address that when I talked about all electric. So I will talk about that a little bit. And then David, if you have any additional thoughts, we can certainly get some thoughts from you there. But
that sounds good.
The one main caveat to my comment that this really doesn't impact us much is in relation to the all electric appendices, which, as I noted, are no longer part of either the base code, which they never were, or the list of appendices as they were originally in the draft of the 2024 IECC. And because they have been removed from an appendix to a resource, our statute is pretty explicit that we only can work within what is in the base code and what is within the appendices. And so we are no longer able to work with the all electric appendices in any way of incorporating any provisions of those into the base code of our model code. However, and Carolyn, this will address your other question, David and I spoke, and we have determined that the statute does not in any way address optional appendices to our code at all. And because there is no mandatory nature of any of the optional appendices, that David and I agreed that the board should have essentially free reign on what you would like to include as any optional appendices to the model code. So if you want to take the language that exists now for all electric in those resources and move those into an optional appendix that accompanies our requirements, that would certainly be allowed. And that's not just limited necessarily to the all electric appendices, but also to any provision that the board would want to make as an optional opportunity for jurisdictions to consider. David, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
I don't think I have anything else. I think you got it all out. I'm happy to answer more questions. Looks like we got a couple questions already. I think, Will, your hand was up first.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So just to clarify, and I think I have this right, anything that is in one of the optional appendices to 21 or 24 IECC, we have the ability to consider making that a requirement of our base code. Something like this all electric is something that we could consider as an additional optional appendix that we would offer. But in the case of the all electric appendix or now resource, we actually wouldn't have been able to incorporate that anyhow, I believe, as part of the base code, because we are required by statute to have pathways for both all electric and mixed fuel buildings, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I think the difference here is that if there was any interest in weakening the all electric appendices to allow for like a limited use mixed fuel pathway or something of that nature, just one example of what could have been done. Now that we don't have access to those all electric appendices anymore for the base code, that is no longer an option if the board had wanted to consider something like that. But otherwise, yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Carolyn?
Yeah, thanks both. I just wanted to take this moment just to offer that I do want to name, I would like us as a group to explore adding optional appendices, especially where we know we have Colorado jurisdictions seeking to adopt requirements such as all electric, because the benefit of having a state code and base code that people can work with as we drive towards greater consistency. So I just wanted to take a moment to advocate for that in my role on the board, that I do think we should pursue at least all electric, and I think we should look at if there's other provisions that aren't in the 2024, but that we're seeing Colorado jurisdictions moving towards, that we consider those as options, optional appendices as well.
And I would also note too that there are, I believe, well, after the all electric ones are removed, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there are 8 other, 7 or 8 other commercial appendices as well, all of which the board can consider for inclusion in the base code. But also, if there are ones that the board determines should not be put in the base code in any form, either as is or in a weakened version, those could also continue to be optional appendices if the board wanted to include them. So just keep that in mind as well. Tim?
Yeah, thanks. So would an option be on the table of, instead, like, it sounds like the all electrification is not on the table, so to speak, but to maybe convert that to an, like, I guess I call it electric preferred. I mean,
yeah,
I would, and David, maybe you could answer that, or Adam, and maybe converting that, because there are jurisdictions that have done electric preferred, which penalizes, of course, mixed fuel, or gets you, higher efficiency there. So would that be an option to be looking at?
If it's an option that the board wants to consider, then it's an option we can look at. I think, Tim, the challenge here now is that without the all electric appendix language, there would have to be a different approach to trying to pursue an electric preferred pathway if that's one that the board decides it wants to pursue. But I think there are other ways of achieving that with other appendices as they are currently in existence, and that will be in the final code. There are other ways to do it if the board feels that's an appropriate path.
Okay, so that sounds like we'd have to write our own appendix.
Not necessarily. I think you would just have to figure out a different way to modify one of the other appendices. And we can certainly, when we talk about the appendices in the next meeting, which is the meeting after this one, we will be talking way more in depth in what the appendices are, what the different options are with those. And so we can certainly get into that detail in the next meeting.
Great, thanks. I would just suggest that'll be part of our agenda at that point then. Thanks.
Certainly.
And then Tim, just to add to that a tiny bit, is I think I'd prefer to wait and weigh in on a specific proposal rather than to try to make a blanket statement. That's okay.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I just want the concept I wanted to throw out, and
Sure.
to get the feedback or get the board thinking about that. Thanks.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And I just noted a comment in the Q&A, a question in the Q&A, and just wanted to call attention to it. And we can draw from the more stringent requirements from either the 2021 or 2024 IECC, correct? So if something was weakened in the 2024 over the 2021, we could revert to the 2021. That's accurate, isn't it?
It's a good question.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
David and I may need to go review that, because I don't know that the statute is clear that we can just pick and choose provisions from each version. It kind of, the way I read it is that it may require that, well, if you go with 2024, you stick with 2024 throughout, not just like, oh, well, we want 2024, except we want the envelope provisions from 2021. So yeah, I don't know that. And how about just David and we will go back and try to answer that question definitively and get back to you.
My sense is that the spirit of it is working with the new one if it's ready in time, when it becomes ready. I'm not sure exactly what the specific language is, though. So let's have Adam and I look at it.
Yeah, we'll review it and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, and as you're reviewing it, I think getting clarity on where the stringency applies, if it's at the total overall performance cost level or the individual measure level, I think that will help guide us as we move forward. Because I could envision a space where we alleviate requirements in one area, but feel like the 2021 provisions were better, and we may want to discuss making them more stringent. So the extent that you can get clarity around our give and take there, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yep, we will review and get back to you on that for sure. So I think, let me just look really quickly, make sure I covered all of these different points. I think we did. Any additional questions on the IECC appeals, what that's going to mean? I will also note that Anna's review is going to now, when we talk about residential provisions, that is going to already factor in the removal of the residential provisions that are no longer there. So just keep that in mind, that unlike when we talked about commercial, residential is going to be reflective of the way things are now post appeal. Any other questions on appeals before we move on to a couple of the follow-ups on commercial? Elizabeth?
Yeah, just big picture. I know it was, I think how this code came out was quite the surprise to a lot of people, that it ended up in a different format than I think most folks were expecting. Do you know if there's a story there of how it, I don't know, I don't want to say derailed, but it did have a different outcome? And were there factors that made that change? There are things that we should consider and that the board can look at as whether these would be factors that should be applicable to Colorado or not. And mostly I just want to make sure if there was a strong voice there, I kind of want to know what it was and see if it's something that that we should consider, or if it's something that's not necessarily applicable for Colorado.
So
does that make sense?
You mean that the decisions made by the ICC board were a surprise? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, like just sort of big picture, you know, how some of these all electric measures were not incorporated, I guess.
Yeah, so I think there's still a little bit of there's not a ton of clarity on some of it as to why that is the way it is. So just for one example of that, I still don't really have a fundamental understanding of why removing all electric appendices changes anything, because they were voluntary anyway. So like that's just one example where, I think EPCA preemption, federal preemption doesn't really like that to me didn't really make sense, because they were already voluntary. No one was requiring it anyway, and nothing in the base code required electrification. And so that's just
that's why I was so curious. It's like, is there some kind of conflict there? I'm just curious what drove that.
Yeah, well, I think that
and I think we should probably address it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I mean, to some degree, a lot of these ICC, the board meeting was, closed door, right? Like, so we can't know what conversations were had in that meeting, and we can't know what
I was hoping there was like a public record or something.
Yeah, we can't know necessarily exactly what advice was given by attorneys or any other kind of, influence that may have had a place in those meetings. So all of our assumptions are conjecture, really, other than what the board actually said in their release, which was basically all they said was, for the electrification provisions, is that there is a concern about federal preemption. And then that for many of the other provisions, like the readiness, and the demand response provisions, that they just didn't have a direct connection to energy efficiency that was required in their view by the scope and intent that we just read. So those were really the main reasons, was the lack of connection to energy efficiency and the focus on greenhouse gas reductions, and then federal preemption. Those were the two main concerns that were raised publicly on those issues.
Okay, thanks.
Kristen?
There's been some recent reporting on this, so I just dropped like an example of that in the chat in case you care to review that later.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, thoughts? I was going to say concerns, but I think there's probably a lot of people who have concerns, so let's not go there. Anything else from anybody?
Adam, I'll just call attention to one more comment in the Q&A from Eric. So if board members are curious or want to reach out to Eric on anything, he's provided his contact information there.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, well, I think we're turning it over to Anna now.
Okay, so we had a couple follow-ups to some of the questions that were asked by the board during the last meeting. So these were the three that we did not answer in the meeting. If there were additional, please let us know. We're happy to answer those as well. There was a question about products that can support an R10 thermal break in the slab, for slabs that extend past the thermal envelope, for things like I was going to call them patios, but that's not the right word, balconies. And we've listed 2 examples there, but there are more available as well. Increased efficiency for the water heaters. Is the efficiency aligned with federal minimums? The calculations were updated. Part of the change to the code was that the calculations were updated to align with the federal minimums. And then the last question, do you know if the section C406 is documented compliance with the EPCA? And I could not find any reference to EPCA in the C406 proposal. I can do some more digging and figure out what's going on there and get back to you. But from everything I could find, I could not find a reference to EPCA in any of the C406 proposals.
And I would also just jump in and note too that none of the appeals that were filed addressed C406 beyond what the additional appendix would have required. And so there were no appeals filed with any concerns about EPCA on C406 either.
That's a great point. Okay, so we took the cost modeling that we did and the annual energy cost modeling and EUI that we did for the commercial code and updated it to reflect the removal of these appendices. The removal of the sections 2 appendices, as well as the update to have the baseline include the Colorado electric ready and solar ready codes.
He said it was there. I see it like, yeah, there's the legs on.
Sorry, Kim, these other bullet points. So we were
I'm happy to jump in, Anna, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so so just to note that Anna has updated the cost modeling to reflect the conversation we had last time to include the state's new minimum and to shift based on the change to the 2024 IECC. And what we wanted to just share is we also talked as a team about our cost modeling approach through the remainder of this project. So given that we have sort of a limited scope with what we're able to accomplish through the funding that came for this board process, we wanted to be really strategic in the point in time when we are sharing cost information with you all to, one, make sure that we're being respectful of the scope of the technical assistance and not asking Anna to run 1,000 different models, but at the same time, making sure you guys have the right information you need to have the discussions you need to have and make the decisions you need to make. So just a couple of updates on how we are going to be approaching cost modeling through the rest of the project. So again, as Anna mentioned, any cost modeling will now include the state's current code baseline as the baseline cost. For our early code discussions, which will be, kind of now through that second public engagement meeting in October, we are going to be summarizing the relative contributions of code measures to upfront costs and energy savings, and showing you kind of a breakdown of the anticipated increase in cost, where that's coming from, and in the anticipated savings, where what elements of the code, where is that coming from? I think we want to hold at this point in time on providing some of that detailed cost modeling because point in time cost figures can be very controversial, can drive a lot of backlash, and are point in time estimates, right? We know that the construction industry is in a constant flux when it comes to the cost of different materials, different equipment, different systems. So for these early cost conversations that we're going to have, we're not going to be providing a breakdown of like X many dollars for the solar system, but rather it'll be saying of the total increased cost, X% came from solar. So hopefully that will give you guys enough information to be able to understand relative cost and relative impact, like we discussed last time, and give you enough to move forward with. I say all of that, and then what we will be providing is a more detailed cost model after we get the first version of the draft code completed. So we're going to have all of our code conversations that will lead itself to a draft code package. at the time that we release our first draft code package in full, that's when we'll be running a final, or excuse me, our first detailed cost analysis. We'll go through the public engagement, the vetting, the review of all of that draft code package, and then we will run a final cost model on our final draft code package. So there will be 2 detailed cost models that you'll receive. We're not going to receive them until after we have a firmed up draft code package. And this, again, is just to make sure that we don't use all of Anna's time and support and hours ahead of when we really need it to understand the impacts of the draft code we've developed. So, Tim.
Yeah, thanks sorry to interrupt or ask the question. Can you remind me, I guess, us, when we anticipate the first draft code package? The reason I'm asking is I've got a sustainability committee meeting, study session Monday night, and this would be helpful to have. I'm going to summarize a lot of stuff from tonight or today's meeting for that meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. So we are looking at that first draft to be ready. Let's see, it will be about early to mid-October. So we'll have our final meeting to discuss we'll do 3 meetings for commercial, 3 meetings for residential, 2 meetings to discuss updates to the model electric and solar ready code. Those will all wrap up October 1st. And then between October 1st and our first public meeting, which will be October 17th, we're planning to release the draft code package, and that's when we'll build our first cost model. Good question, Tim. Any other questions on our just sort of our proposed approach or final approach on how we're going to incorporate cost modeling into this process? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I'm sorry. Just when we say cost modeling, and so I'm gonna get a little nerdy, but Anna, you're with me. Are you using like prototype models for that?
So we have created
building types and stuff.
Yeah, we've created energy models that are of a multifamily building, an office building, and a single family home that are reference CBECs and the most common square footage and size of each building type. Does that make sense? So we're not just using, we're using models that are in the front range that are most commonly built based on size and square footage, conditioned area, construction types, things like that.
Okay, we were just doing some DOE work that had some interesting metrics that used the prototype buildings, and it had both the weighting, like WEI, GHT, of each building type across all of the different climate zones in Colorado. So I think, you know, we're certainly heavy in 5B, but we've got to be aware of our other climate zones and those impacts there. That would be a lot of modeling, so I don't want to just cause a lot of busy work. But maybe I can share that with you and see if that informs how the costs are weighted as well, as you know, building types and residential and commercial and all that.
Well, and I know, just to add to that, and not just other climate zones related to the energy, but also just simply cost of construction, like that. If we're just using front range modeling for this, like it's gonna exclude like a third of the state where the construction costs are so much higher. And so I think we need to be cognizant of that as well. We're never going to hit everything perfectly, but we can't ignore that.
Yeah, good point. So Anna, I'll dig up that link and share it with you, see if that influences anything for you.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on to the 2024 residential code? Okay. Feel free to throw them in the chat if they come up, but otherwise, Anna, I will pass it back to you.
Yeah. So we did update the first cost to reflect the removal of the electric ready, solar ready, EV charging, and electric storage ready provisions from the 2024 base code, and you will see a significant reduction in the estimated cost per square foot for both offices and multifamily. We are still showing a significant cost reduction as well as EUI reduction. And if we go to the next slide, you can see kind of the impact to the first costs. So you'll see that we have the majority of the first costs impact is due to the on-site solar that's required. The next largest piece of the pie is the reduced infiltration, so requiring the smoke trace or assessment to determine any sort of leaks in the building, as well as their remediation. So we're assuming a higher first cost for construction to make sure that the air barrier isn't actually installed correctly. Upgraded heating and cooling and lighting efficiencies to reflect the increased efficiency per section C406 and 407. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. Remind me, this is first cost updates compared to the 2021 base code without our solar ready and electric ready provisions?
With,
yeah. And then did you say you took out the solar ready and electric ready from the 2024?
Correct. So we're not, we talked about that on the team to decide if we would like show a credit to the 2024 because the solar ready and electric ready weren't in there. But because they are going to still be part of Colorado's code, we kept them in both. So now you're seeing the 2024 IECC as compared to the 2021 IECC, including Denver's codes in both analyses. Does that make sense?
So you added in our solar ready and electric ready provisions to both versions. So this is really the incremental. Okay, that's the clarification, because I heard you say you took them out, but then I wanted to make sure that we were actually including them in both, because it would make the math wonky.
Correct. Thanks. Yeah, I had the same question.
Great. Okay. And we can go to the next slide to see the breakdown for multifamily. Again, the majority of that first cost is due to the on-site solar. Reduced infiltration is the next. We have higher first costs for upgraded heating and cooling in multifamily buildings. Both of the models that we're using have distributed terminal systems. So, for example, distributed heat pumps in the all-electric multifamily building. Each unit requires an upgrade now, and that can be a higher first cost for multifamily buildings. Go ahead, Kim.
Just a quick question, and I apologize if I missed it. Do these cost estimates include labor costs, or are they mostly focused on materials?
So we're trying to include the cost of, the increased labor costs for the air barrier construction, items like that. And then we did include the labor for the on-site solar as well.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful to understand why the reduced infiltration value is so much higher, is because it's labor intensive, but not necessarily equipment intensive. So
correct.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, that's what we had for the commercial update. Are there any additional questions on the commercial? Great. Okay. Now let's get into residential. We'll try and make this speedy. I'll roll up my sleeves for this one. Okay. So I wanted to go through, first of all, in section R401, there were some updates to how the code is structured a little bit. So previously there were some, additional energy efficiency requirements. Those have now been summarized in section R408. So now if you're complying with the residential code prescriptively, you have to comply with R401 through 404 plus 408. Simulated building performance only complies with R405. They are not required to comply with additional energy efficiency packages. You'll see that homes with on-site fuel burning appliances are required to meet a 20% annual energy cost savings as compared to the simulated building performance. And then all electric homes are only required to have a 15% annual energy cost savings. The energy rating index section is still R406. And then, like I said, the additional energy efficiency requirement have been removed and summarized in 408. Next slide. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Yep, thank you. So under the R405, that appears to me going along the line of a electric preferred method. Would that be correct?
That I agree. It is definitely weighted towards an electric preferred savings. This was not on the list as something that was going to be removed from the code. And I'll be interested to see if it remains when we see the final code.
Well, it wasn't in the, I read the draft, I didn't notice this, but this right here, I think would be in line with not even needed an appendix, maybe, at least on the residential side. Thanks.
I think it's important to note too, that's only for the simulated performance path though, right? Like there's nothing that would do anything like that in prescriptive or anything like that.
So, and this is kind of a question I had in the code. So we have these to be determined values, and we'll talk about it when we get to section R408. They haven't assigned, there's now a point section similar to C406. Yes, C406 in the commercial code. A point system in the additional efficiency packages. And those points have not yet been assigned, particularly for mechanical efficiencies in terms of heat pumps or additional energy savings for gas furnaces, going to a condensing gas furnace. So I'll be interested to see how those points align after these, the decisions made by the board. So. Because in my opinion, they were planning to align R408 with this section in R405. But we'll see if that persists when we see the final code. Go ahead, Tim.
I just have Adam pointed out a great thing on, that is just the simulated building performance. All of our production builders for many years, that's the only way they've done through all the way back to the 18, 21, 24 using this. So I think, at least in Broomfield, that would capture everybody except the big custom homes. But that was a good point, Adam.
Next slide. Okay, so there were some changes in the requirements for the envelope. There was a slight decrease in the allowable maximum U factor for fenestration from a U 0.30 to a U 0.28, so a little bit more efficient there. A decrease in the skylight maximum U factor from 0.55 to 0.50. An increase in ceiling U factor requirements from 0.024 to 0.026. And they added heated, unheated, and heated slab F factor insulation requirements as well. Go ahead, Kim.
Just a quick question on the first item. Is that climate zones 5 through higher? Or is it only climate zone?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Next slide. Forward. Yeah, there we go. There's also an additional requirement now that attic knee wall assemblies and truss framing that separate conditioned from unconditioned attic spaces are required to comply with all above grade wall insulation requirements. So just making sure we have that really continuous thermal envelope around the conditioned areas of the home. Next slide. There is also additional air barrier and insulation installation requirements. Added insulation requirements for access hatches, floors, and eave baffles. Framing cavities around windows and skylights must be filled with insulation. And there's just a picture of if you don't properly insulate your glazing, what could happen? Added air barrier and insulation requirements for common walls or double walls between units, and then a reduced maximum air leakage rate. So we are requiring a slightly tighter construction in the residential as well. Climate zone 6 is now required to have heat recovery on the ventilation systems. And they are now also requiring similar fan efficacies for those smaller fans, as we saw in the commercial code. And we talked about that in our last meeting, particularly around small ventilation fans or exhaust fans.
Question?
Go ahead, Kristen. Yeah.
What about climate zone 7?
Climate zone 7, it was already required to have the energy efficiency.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Sure. This was a big one. So if electric heat is the primary heating source in detached dwellings, an additional heater is required in the largest living zone, and it must have an HSPF greater than 7.4. So it has to be a heat pump. So you now are not allowed to have one central electric resistance coil serving the entire home. And then this is kind of a small requirement to have roof and gutter de-icing controls should turn off when the outdoor air temperature is above 40 degrees. And make sure we're not just burning through energy. Next slide. Permanently installed luminaries shall be capable of not less than 45 lumens per watt. And then the big changes in the lighting requirements were that there are new lighting power allowances for building exteriors. So there's an increased efficiency around exterior lighting. All lights in occupied spaces are required to be controlled with a dimmer or an automatic shutoff control. And then there are automatic shutoff controls required for garages, unfinished basements, laundry rooms, and utility rooms. If renewables are used for compliance with the code, all RECs must be retired on behalf of the property owner, so you wouldn't be able to sell your RECs back to your local utility. In section R405, this is what we talked about earlier. Buildings that use a fuel burning appliance for space heating or water heating are required to have 20% savings as compared to the the baseline design. And then buildings without a fuel burning appliance are only required to have 15% savings. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Can we go back to the Rex one just really quick?
Yeah.
So is this is only if renewables are used for compliance. It's not necessarily if a homeowner has renewables.
Correct.
That they must retain the Rex. And the only reason I asked that is because, you know, our statute, we talked about this a little bit kind of in our first meeting, where the statute essentially has that provision that says nothing in the code shall preclude a utility from acquiring Rex from a building owner. And so we may, this may be something that if we, you know, maintain this provision in the code at all, we may have to evaluate that, how that might look with the final code and be in compliance with the statute. But just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, as your solar expert on the panel, I can tell you REC retirement is a meaningless provision. And so I would be advocating to remove the requirement, just because it under Colorado context, it does not prevent double counting of emissions reduction. So you're just creating an unnecessary provision that's actually very challenging to enforce.
Thanks, Carolyn. We can certainly visit that issue when we talk about the changes, but I just wanted to point out that there may be some conflict with our statute there if we leave it as is.
Can you guys still hear me? I'm sorry,
We can hear you. Anna, your video keeps cutting out, but your sound seems to be fine. Unless I just spoke too soon.
hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes. 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 Amazing.
All right, my laptop recently on Monday decided to stop working. So I'm using an old one, and it's been a journey both emotionally and technically. Okay. So now there is section R408, which requires that there are 2 additional energy saving measures that meet or exceed a total of 10 credits for the home. If the dwelling unit is larger than 5,000 square feet, you're required to have 15 points. All of these point values have not yet, in the draft that I have not yet been assigned. And so we had to make some assumptions around the pathway that most homes would take. But so there are efficiencies available. The different efficiency packages are listed here. So you have increased envelope performance, so providing a UA greater than what's required. More efficient HVAC performance, providing additional savings above the mandatory minimum efficiencies. If you have a ground source heat pump system on the home or the dwelling unit, that gets you quite a few points. If there are ductless split systems, you also get quite a few points. Increased water heating efficiency is listed. Reduced air leakage. So in testing, if you provide reduced air leakage as compared to what's required in the code. Energy efficient appliances, so providing all Energy Star appliances within the home, on-site renewable energy, and then demand responsive thermostats. Any questions on R408? Great.
Anna, maybe I guess the one thing I would just ask is if you could kind of explain for those who were not familiar with what R408 was like before, just kind of the main change with R408 to how it kind of went towards this point system rather than you must just pick one additional efficiency package or whatever the difference was.
Yeah, so, and in the 2021 IECC, all pathways were required to have additional efficiency. So even if we showed efficiency through the simulated building performance pathway, we had to show additional energy, that we had compliance with the additional energy efficiency. And I'm just trying to pull up this so that I don't misspeak because I work mostly in the commercial code. But the additional energy efficiency allowance were just these packages that were listed in section C408. I'm sorry, R408. I told you C is burned into my brain. So you had the option to show additional thermal envelope performance like we have listed here, more efficient HVAC equipment performance, reduced service water heating, more efficient duct thermal distribution, and improved air sealing. And you had to select one of these packages. So you had to show energy efficiency through one of these packages, and now we're requiring 2 packages, and the points are assigned based on your climate zone. So there'll be different points available for dwelling units in the different climate zones, and your total package has to come to 10 points, 10 credits, I should say. Go ahead, Rob.
How do these additional efficiency packages compare performance-wise to what's in the 21 code? Are they higher, the same, lower than what they were in the 21 code? Because they seem to line up pretty closely. It's the great thing about having a code book at your desk.
Yeah, so they line up closely to what was allowed in section C408 under the 2021 IECC. But now we have the additional options, which are the ground source heat pump, as well as the ductless split systems, energy efficient appliances, renewable energy, and the demand responsive thermostats. And they're also weighting the different sections or different categories differently for each climate zone. So previously you just had to pick one, and typically it was like thermal envelope performance is what we saw in the few residential projects that I worked on. So I think the difficulty here is that I can't give you a full picture of how it will exactly align without the full point values.
Oh no, I mean, like, so the ones that do have an analog in the 21 are the conditions, the performance expectations identical, or are they higher in 24?
So for the thermal envelope, for example, is that what you're asking?
Right, like for thermal envelope, I mean, or for additional HVAC equipment, it's 95 or 10, 16, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so
not the count of points, just whether not the count of points or how far it gets you towards meeting the achievement packages, just are the expectations higher than they were in 21?
Yeah,
or
so
identical?
there are different levels that you can meet. So you could show, previously you had to show under the thermal envelope, you had to show 5% savings if that was the package you were selecting. Now you can show 2.5% savings, but you only get maybe 1 point. You could show 5% or 7.5. You know, it's just the point.
So on, right?
Yes.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Jesse?
In general, with the related to the climate zones and how the points are assigned, do you see that it's more difficult to reach those efficiencies at a higher climate zone?
No. So for example, under the thermal envelope pathway, they get in climate zone 7 and 8, you get more points for additional efficiency than you would in climate zone 5 or 6.
Okay, and the reason I just asked that is also with the home size, because if it were more difficult and then our housing stock has larger home sizes, I'm just wondering if those two things together make it like nearly impossible to build a home like that, which would be fine with me, but maybe not our constituents. But that's helpful to kind of understand. And I do like this, the home size piece is also very helpful.
It's interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Kim.
This may be a more complicated question than is necessary at the moment, but I guess I'm curious. I guess the first question is, this requirement, is it for prescriptive pathway?
Yes.
Compliant? Okay. So if a jurisdiction is choosing a performance pathway for homes over a certain size and that they have to go that direction, then this wouldn't apply or compare because they have to go with the performance pathway anyway.
Correct. Yeah. If they are just requiring performance pathway for homes over a certain size, they wouldn't require compliance with section 408.
Okay. But this would apply for any homes that fit within the prescriptive list requirements. This would be applicable. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Good questions. Okay. Next slide. So we put together the same chart that we did for the commercial side of things. And we're looking at first cost as compared to the 2021 IECC I wrote Colorado codes to make the header smaller. And then same thing around annual energy cost and EUI. So for a single family, all electric home, understanding it, and this is where things get a little bit murky without all of the points available in section C408 with the TBDs that are in there right now. We made the educated assumption that the points assigned to high performance heat pumps would be greater than those assigned to natural gas heating appliances, just because of that percent savings required under the performance pathway. So we assumed that the all-electric single-family home would have slightly more points available under the high-performance HVAC option. And so they have slightly lower first cost as compared to the mixed fuel homes and multifamily buildings. You'll see that across the board, we're getting 10 to 11% savings in terms of annual energy costs and 10 to 11% savings in terms of EUI. Questions, concerns, thoughts, feelings? Great. Okay. So I picked a performance pathway for these homes. So this is just my opinion of the easiest way to get there based on the information we have available in section C408. So I picked energy efficient appliances and heating and cooling upgrades. We did also include a higher first cost for the additional insulation that's required for below grade walls and slabs, as well as the additional labor costs around air barrier and air sealing of the home to comply with the lower air leakage rates. So you'll see we have a high first cost for the energy efficient appliances, and the heating and cooling efficiency upgrades are slightly larger in the mixed fuel home as compared to the all electric. Go ahead, Kristen.
So as the former manager for Energy Star Appliances, I'm curious which types of appliances. Are you including HVAC and water heating and appliances there, or just kitchen, bath, laundry, washer, dryer, etc.?
We were including the energy efficiency upgrades to all fans, kitchen appliances, as compared to just like standard construction or standard efficiency. And then the heating and cooling coils themselves are included in the heating and cooling efficiency upgrades.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just surprised to see that because we often had zero incremental cost with Energy Star appliances. So maybe I'll circle back later on.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, that question got a little bit at mine. It's less of a question, but I just want to name it. This is the percent of incremental cost. It's not really representative of a large incremental cost.
Correct. Yes. This is
the pies are not drawn equivalent, so likely that mixed fuel pie is larger than the all electric because it had to hit a higher performance target because of the electric preferred, right? So
correct. Yes.
The fact that half that pie chart on the right is appliances doesn't necessarily mean that was, a significant increase in incremental costs because of those measures.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You can go to the next slide. It's just the same, but for multifamily. So again, we see, the higher impact to heating and cooling efficiencies for multifamily buildings. You have more heating and cooling coils, as well as the air barrier construction, and then the energy efficient appliances in every single unit was assumed for the compliance pathway there. Once we have points assigned for every category, we'll have a better idea if the compliance path I selected is the one that we think most homeowners and dwelling units will take. It's a little bit difficult without all the points available.
So I think that was it. Nice work, Anna. 30 minutes, done. So we do have quite a bit of time. This is really the end of our topic for today. So about 25 minutes left if there are deeper dive questions about the residential code. If you'd like us to go back to any of the different sections and talk more specifically about those. But yeah, we've got about 25 minutes to dive deep. So feel free to jump in if you've got thoughts or questions. Jesse, we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Anna, can you review the home size requirements for the prescriptive pathway
Sure.
in the 2024?
So, any homes that are, and we can go back, I think it was slide. Keep going. Oh, no, there it is. Sorry. For dwelling units 5,000, larger than 5,000 square feet are required to comply with 15 credits. Dwelling units smaller than 5,000 square feet are only required to have 10 credits.
Sorry, is there a home size at which they have to go to the performance, what the sample built dwelling, whatever the other pathway is?
The performance pathway?
Yeah.
Not
or could they
10.
still, at any home size, they could choose either one?
Yes.
Okay.
Tim?
Yeah, thank you. I know in the past several cycles for the IECC, I've seen the cost modeling analysis put out by the DOE, Department of Energy, and maybe some other, I don't know who else I've seen that come from, but the DOE side, do you know, since it hasn't been published, and how slow the federal folks may be, is that anticipated to be done maybe in this century?
I think Adam has more of a pulse on that one than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've generally understood in talking to PNNL about this is that the final analysis could take up to a year. So the odds of us seeing it in this calendar year are probably pretty low. I think they do their preliminary cost and efficiency analysis, but they don't actually do the final determination for like up to a year. So I think that's how long so for example, for 2021, which I think the code was published in February, March timeframe in 2021, I think the final analysis didn't actually come out until like June of 2022. It was quite a while. So
thank you.
I thought Jesse's question might have been related to what I was asking earlier, related to performance and mandatory methodologies. So I just thought I'd clarify that the reason for my question is primarily the building codes that I deal with are in high mountain communities with houses that are much, much larger than 5,000 square feet. So a lot of building codes across the state do have requirements where if a home is over a certain size, then they have to achieve a certain ERI or HERS score. And some of those communities have gone toward net zero with their house size requirements. So essentially beyond a certain size, a house has to follow the performance path in order to follow the building code requirements. So my question, I guess it related to that, was just how these requirements, because I know that for jurisdictions to adopt, they must be equal to or beyond what the 2024 requirements are. So I was trying to figure out how that integrated and related to what jurisdictions are already doing. So hopefully it's just helpful additional background.
Yeah, and we'll talk a lot, not the next meeting, but the meeting after, about the local codes across Colorado and how they're implicated in all of this. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks, Kim. I appreciate that. And I think that was kind of where I was going to, because we don't currently have home size requirements, but to something that I believe Tim said earlier, that he sees a lot of people going the performance pathway. We're the exact opposite. For our large homes, we have primarily home builders that are like, just tell us what to do to check the boxes. And so we thought a couple of years ago when we adopted Zero Energy Ready homes that more people would use a performance pathway, and we're not seeing that. And so I love I really like how there's sort of this point methodology to kind of pick and choose, but I wasn't sure if at some point a home size was going to kick you over and make you do performance based within this code, or like you just mentioned, if it is sort of embedded in the local codes. So that's where I was going with that question as well.
Adam.
just going to kind of try to get at the other point of your question too, Kim, about the, essentially, I think what part of what you were asking is like, are local governments who currently require that, who currently have that, like certain home size or larger Musco performance, like, are they going to continue to be allowed to do that under this code? I think the answer is if they can demonstrate that it's equivalent or better, like if they're putting additional requirements or additional stringency on those larger homes, then yes, absolutely they can do that. If for whatever reason that would be used to try to provide less stringency than the prescriptive path would require, then that may be where it would trigger an issue. But I don't think that that's generally what's happening. And so I think by and large, that's probably the answer is yes, but I think it does to some degree come on a case-by-case basis and try to, strike at like what is the jurisdiction trying to do by requiring that?
That's a good, yes, follow-up to what I was, I guess, trying to understand. In general, the intent is to make the requirements more stringent for larger homes. And my understanding, and I guess this is a question, is that the performance path with the ERI score is intended to be somewhat equivalent to the prescriptive path or somewhere along there. So we're using that ERI required score in the performance path to be the minimum requirement. And as homes get larger, then they have to achieve a lower score beyond that. So as long as that's still true, so that score that's in the code for the performance path matches up with what the requirements in the prescriptive are, then I think those jurisdictions would still be meeting the intent.
Sorry, my unmute button wouldn't unmute. I think that, again, I think it really depends on a case by case. Like, I don't think you can just say that like, absolutely, this is the right approach or that it would be the right, but from what you described in that particular situation, I would say, yes, that is an acceptable approach. I don't think we could always say that going performance is always, like requiring performance would always be the acceptable approach if the purpose was trying to get reduced stringency by doing that. So it would just depend, but based on what you've described, I would say yes.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, I guess I just didn't want to have jurisdictions that have been trying to go beyond code to then be restricted the other way or whatnot. Because that
the goal of our codes is always to serve as a floor, not a ceiling. And so any jurisdiction that wants to serve wants to include a more stringent requirement or require buildings to go along a more stringent pathway, then that is always allowed.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, and I did want to raise the fact that, that as square footage and as kind of enclosed cubic footage go up, the ability to comply with an ERI gets easier and easier and easier. Just something to put a pin in our kind of experience in using the conventional energy modeling tools to demonstrate our energy savings.
I'd concur with that from my experience as well, which is partly why as the categories for house size go up, we've tried to make the score requirements go down accordingly. But yes, that's a very good point.
All right. Any other thoughts or questions on the residential codes? I know
or on commercial if you have any.
Or on commercial. I guess that's a good point.
Codes in general.
If your brains can pull from 2 weeks ago and pull some commercial questions, happy to answer those too.
The only questions I would ask you hold is on appendices, which we will talk about next meeting.
Cliffhanger.
All right. Well, I will, we've got the next 20 minutes. I'll talk slowly through our next step. So if any questions do arise, we make sure we capture them. But recognizing it's late on a Friday and everyone might be a little brain dead, and that's a-okay. If residential questions come up at any point in time between now and our next meeting, certainly reach out. happy to answer those, and or feel free to bring those to the next meeting. We'll save a little space before we dive into the appendices to check and make sure that folks feel like they've got all their questions answered. So I'm gonna move us into our next step slides. So our next meeting is Tuesday, April 16th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So not this week, but the following week. And during that meeting, we'll be talking about the appendices in the commercial and residential IECC. So that's what to look forward to next time. And that should be a pretty cool discussion, I think. And then just a reminder, as we talked about earlier, we are going to send out a few things to you all following this meeting. So the first, and it's not captured here, but we talked about it earlier, is a poll to find the best time to reschedule our October 17th public engagement meeting, to move it to the afternoon in a time slot that works best for this board, that we also think will accommodate members of the public who would like to join. In addition, we will send the spreadsheet that we have some current contacts in for the listserv, and we'll ask that either you add contacts if you think that you know folks that would just be okay receiving those emails. We'll send with the spreadsheet the link that Adam shared at the beginning of the meeting for folks to sign up. So if you'd rather just forward that to your people to have them sign up for the listserv, that is okay as well. And if you do want to fill out contacts in the spreadsheet, we'll just ask that you get those in by April 19th so that we can start to coordinate and send communication out around our public engagement opportunities. All of those will be sent to the board, so you will all receive those and be able to forward those to your networks and constituents accordingly. And as Ali walked through earlier, we've got columns within the spreadsheet where you can indicate if one of the organizations or contacts you added is an equity priority stakeholder or is a subject matter expert for a particular building industry. And if so, that will just kind of help us dial in our engagement approach for the involve level that Ali spoke to earlier, and understanding which stakeholders we want to connect with for that effort. And so with that, I think, oh, and then the last piece of follow-up will follow up on that question that was posed in the Q&A around the 2021 and 2024, and if individual requirements within those are less stringent between the two, if we can pick and choose. So we'll make sure to bring that answer back at our next meeting as well. Adam.
Can you skip back to the last slide again? Sorry. So just wanted to talk about a couple of things related to the appendices discussion. Just obviously, I think number one is that a lot of the discussion on what some of those appendices might look like might be a little bit of guesswork at this point, just because since some of the provisions that were in the draft base code that are now going to be appendices, we don't necessarily know that the language is going to look like 100% identical from what was stripped out of the base code and what's in the appendix. So just bear with us that there may be some higher level discussions about what's included in some of those, but we don't necessarily know the exact language until the code is actually published and we know it's actually in there. So that's one comment on the appendices. The other comment, I guess, is more maybe a question for the group, is that now that some of the readiness provisions are going to be part of appendices, does the group want to talk about those now, or would we rather revisit what the IECC was going to include for readiness provisions when we talk about revisions to our own readiness provisions down the line? Because I don't want to spend a lot of time next meeting, if we want to dig into what some of the other appendices are, spending time talking about readiness provisions that we will have to update anyway. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, but. Go ahead, Ron.
It seems to me that it makes sense to talk about all the readiness provisions at the same time.
Okay, I see some heads nodding. So if anyone disagrees, please feel free to speak up. But otherwise, Kim, maybe when we're structuring that appendix discussion, we can punt any discussion about what IECC was going to include for readiness down to when we talk about readiness later on.
And Adam, just to make sure I'm clear, do we want, and Ron, and team, do we want that to be like inclusive of the readiness for like energy storage, which is not captured in our current code, or just the readiness provisions captured in the model code?
My perspective would be just provisions captured in the model, in our model code. Because I think there will just be a lot of discussion of, well, the IECC appendix includes this, our model code includes this. Do we like ours better? Do we like theirs better? Do we like something in between? Like,
yeah,
something like that. So I don't think that would be very fruitful if we're talking about a topic that's not in our model code. So I think limited mostly to our model code would be best.
Sounds good. All right.
Cool. That's all I had.
Cool. And Tim, you might be asking the question that you posted in the chat there. Just gonna
Yeah,
bring that up.
please, just from a timing, I think that next meeting, if it all works out right, I'll be on an airline flying back from Orlando from the code hearings. That day, I don't know when I'm actually leaving, supposedly Wednesday, hopefully Tuesday, thanks.
Yeah, Adam, do you know how I think they go up pretty immediately.
So it's immediate because we live stream to YouTube, Tim. So when those the links, like when we stop live streaming to YouTube, it automatically, the recording is there. So we send out just like the next, like I'll send out probably on Monday, like the recording for this one for anyone who missed. So we'll send it to you if you want to, like if you want to wait till the next day to get it, we will send it out. But if you don't want to wait, it's on CEO's YouTube page right away.
Which,
thank you.
Which is linked on the Energy Code Board website. All right. Final thoughts, questions, comments from anyone? All right. Well, with that, thank you all, as always, for being here, for your attention. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. We'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, everyone.